Welcome grade 9s. Today we're going to look at the concept of supply and the law of supply. Now you know from our previous session we started out the price theory by looking at demand and the law of demand. And if we can just quickly recap, what did we say? The law of demand says that if prices go up, the demand for that specific product or service will go down. Customers don't want to pay more for a product. But on the other hand, if prices or a price for a specific product goes down, then the demand will increase. So the cheaper the price, the more the demand for a specific product. And that's now in general. There are always exceptions, but this is the general law of demand. And then we also said there's a few things that need to stay the same in order for the law of demand to be true. We only look at the fact that prices change and what influence that will have on demand. All right, so today we're now putting ourselves in the shoes of the supplier and we're going to look at the law of supply. Now, as with the previous one, let's say that this is our supply schedule. So we say that, and remember we spoke about the Twiggles chips. So I'm just going to put that down. We said 6 Rand, 5 Rand, 4 Rand, and I'm going to give you this. Right. Good. Now, remember when we spoke about the Twiggles chips, I said the students in my class like to buy it. We sell it there at school for fundraising. So now I'm the supplier. So what will happen now is, say, for example, I know that I can get 6 Rand for this packet of Twiggles chips. That is a good price. So then I, as the supplier, will be happy to supply lots of packets of chips at 6 Rand. So as the example shows us there, let's say I'm prepared to supply 30 packets of chips if I can sell them for 6 Rand in the market to the students in my class. If the price goes down to 5 Rand, that means I will now obviously make less profit. So in that case, I'm only willing to supply 20 packets of Twiggles at 5 Rand each. Let's say something happens and the price even drops further to 4 Rand. Now I will be making very little profit. So would it be worth my while to supply lots of packets of chips to the students in the class at 4 Rand only? No. So it will be very hard for me, but I will only be able to supply and be willing to supply 10 packets of chips to the class at 4 Rand each. Now that is then my supply schedule. So let's see how it looks on the graph if we plot this curve. So once again, I've already drawn my vertical and horizontal axis, my y and my x axis. The horizontal one is always my quantity and the vertical one we make our price. Okay, so how do we plot the supply curve then? Let's have a look. At 6 Rand, I was willing to supply 30 packets of chips. So what do? We might take our fingers and we get where these 2 points meet. And we make, just see more or less over there, we make a little dot to indicate, we plot that point on the graph. The next one, at 5 Rand, I as a supplier was willing to supply 20 packets of chips. So once again, 5 Rand, 20, more or less where they meet. You will obviously do it with a ruler and maybe on some graph paper. I'm just estimating here. And then the last one, at 4 Rand, I was only willing to supply 10 packets of chips. So where's 4 Rand now? Over here. Where's 10? More or less over here. Okay. I think that, yeah, more or less over there. So once you've plotted the information that you've received, the supply schedule, then you connect the dots. You basically draw your curve and there you go. It can be in a straight line. This one is actually supposed to be quite straight. It can also form like a curved line. That's perfectly fine. You have to work with the information. If you have to draw the supply curve or any curve, you have to work with the information that's given to you. And then we normally label our curve. So S and S, just to show that this is our supply curve. And can you see, if you compare it to what we saw with the demand curve, that the supply curve is the opposite or is in the opposite direction of the demand curve. So we say that the supply curve has a positive or intuitive slope or slant. And why is that? Because of this law. If price goes up, then supply also goes up. If a price of a product goes down, then the supply also will go down. If we recall from our previous session where we had the law of demand, can you still remember that we said with the demand, if price goes up, prices go higher, then the demand will go down for that specific product or service. If prices go down, then the demand will obviously go up because people always want to get a bargain for a price or a product. So guys, this is the supply curve, and remember we said this is for this law of supply to be true, we said we only look at price as a factor. So price changes, and as a result of that, suppliers will be willing to supply more or less of a specific product into the market. Now, what other factors will influence this? And we will also see that later on when there's changes on the demand and supply graph. But things, for example, like the cost of production. If a supplier can find a cheaper way of manufacturing a product because the raw materials of that product is now cheaper, then it means the supplier might be willing to supply more of a product at a lower price. So that will then change the whole scenario here. Another thing, for example, the method of production. If I find an easier way or more cost-effective way of manufacturing these Twiggles chips, I once again will reduce my cost, and therefore I might be able to supply it at a lower price. Number of producers. Or suppliers, if I'm the only teacher selling these packets of chips, I sort of have a little bit of a monopoly. But now, if there's more teachers joining and selling the chips, that might have an effect on how many packets of chips I'm willing to supply to the students in the class. Things like change in climate might very well affect suppliers' willingness to supply products at a specific price. If they had maybe a very good weather and there's lots of crop and raw materials, then maybe they're willing to supply at a lower price. If it's been a tough year, maybe then they know I need to get more for my product and I will only supply more at a higher price. And then a very classic example that we see now, or have seen now lately, is the cost of transport. If the petrol price goes up and down, that will have an effect on the price of a product, even on a service. And that might affect the number of products or services that a supplier is willing to supply to the market at a specific price. So there are other factors that can influence a supplier's decision on how many items or products to supply at a specific price. But today we only looked at the fact that if price changes and all these other factors stayed the same, no, there were no extra suppliers, the climate didn't change, the petrol price stayed the same, and there was no better method of production and so on, then the law of supply, this law of supply is what we saw here, and then you'll see this supply curve. Okay, so I hope this made it a little bit more understandable, and now I hope you have a picture of the demand curve that we've done with its negative or inverse slope, and then the supply curve that we've just discussed with its positive slope. In the next session, we're quickly going to look at where to find the equilibrium point, the equilibrium price and quantity in the market with regards to supply and demand.